All right, so today we're diving into a story that's, well, it's pretty disheartening. Imagine, right? You're a student, you get this amazing opportunity, a fully funded scholarship to study abroad. Like a dream come true, yeah. Pack your bags, new experiences, a whole new culture. But then, what if that dream turns into a complete nightmare?
That's exactly what's happened to about 90 Nigerian students from
Yeah.
Zamfara State. They went to study in northern Cyprus 3 years ago, and, well, things haven't gone as planned.
Not at all. These students are now facing some really tough situations, forced to work risky jobs just to get by, some even living in mosques because they can't afford housing. And then you have cases where they can't even access healthcare when they get sick.
It's a far cry from the promise of, quality education and a brighter future they were hoping for.
Absolutely. One student was even quoted as saying, "We've become like beggars, and people here regard us as beggars when we mention Zamfara." That really paints a picture of just how desperate things have become.
It's a powerful statement. And to understand how things went so wrong, we need to go back to the beginning. 3 years ago, the Zamfara state government awarded these students scholarships to study at the Cyprus International University. It was a big deal, a chance for them to, pursue their dreams. But the funding, it seems like it just vanished, and these students have been left stranded.
So we have news articles and video interviews with the students, and what we're going to try to do today is piece together what happened, who's responsible, and most importantly, what might happen to these students.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation, but let's start with some basics. The students initially got a stipend of NGN 178,000, which at the time was about US $114. It was meant to cover their living expenses for 6 months.
6 months? That really doesn't seem like much to cover all their living expenses in another country, does it?
Right. Even back in 2022, that amount would barely cover the essentials, especially somewhere like northern Cyprus. And to make matters worse, those initial stipends were the only payments they received.
So the question is, what happened to the rest of the funding?
Well, that's the big mystery, isn't it? Was it corruption, bureaucracy, mismanagement? It's hard to say for sure without a proper investigation,
Yeah.
but the lack of transparency, it definitely raises some red flags.
And that lack of clarity isn't limited to just the funding, right? We've
No,
also got these conflicting statements coming from the Zamfara state government itself.
you're talking about the governor and the commissioner of education, right?
Exactly. The governor says the scholarships will be paid, but then the commissioner says the students will be evacuated. It's pretty confusing.
It is. And it makes you wonder what's really going on within the government. Are there disagreements about how to handle this? Have their priorities changed? It's hard to say for sure.
And just to make things even more complicated, the current Zamfara state government is now placing the blame on the previous administration. They say the previous government didn't set up a proper agreement with the university, and that's why we have all these problems now.
It's a classic political move, isn't it?
Yeah.
Blaming your predecessors. But is it really a valid excuse? Or is it just a way to avoid responsibility?
That's a good question. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the students who are paying the price.
Absolutely. And there's another layer to this. The current government claims they can't pay the Cyprus scholarships because there's a dispute over the amount owed. But they've said they've paid scholarships for other Nigerian students studying in India and Sudan.
That's interesting. So they're choosing to prioritize certain student groups over others.
It does seem that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you question their decision-making process. Are there strategic reasons for prioritizing those specific countries? Or is it something else?
Whatever the reason, it's a pretty stark reminder that government decisions, they have real-world consequences for people. And in this case, it's these students who are feeling the brunt of it.
You're absolutely right. And their experiences are at the heart of this story. So let's delve into their lives a bit, hear their stories, and try to understand the human impact of this situation.
We've talked about the financial struggles and those conflicting government statements, but let's not forget the impact all of this has had on the students' education. I mean, that's the whole reason they went to Northern Cyprus, right?
Exactly. And their academic journeys, well, they've been completely disrupted. One student, I think he was studying petroleum and natural gas engineering, said in an interview, it's turning into years. Just think about that. Years of their lives just slipping away because of this situation.
It's awful. They went there with so much hope, ready to invest in their futures, and now it's all on hold.
And they can't even focus on their studies properly because they're constantly worried about basic survival. Tuition fees are piling up, some have had to drop out, and those who haven't are often missing classes because they're working those risky jobs just to make ends meet.
It's heartbreaking. I can only imagine the pressure they're under.
The toll on their mental health must be immense. We talked about that student who needed surgery. She couldn't even go to a public hospital because of her residency status. She said, "Our parents are less privileged and they have no money. We are really in dire need of assistance." It's a desperate situation, really.
Yeah, her words really highlight the human cost of all of this. They're so far from home, facing these challenges alone, and feeling abandoned by the very people who are supposed to support them.
And that brings us to another complicated issue, the evacuation dilemma. The Zamfara state government has mentioned evacuating the students, but the students themselves, they're not so sure about going back to Nigeria, especially without their transcripts and documentation.
I can see why. I mean, returning without proof of their studies in Cyprus, that would make it nearly impossible to continue their education back in Nigeria.
Exactly. Their education, it's their lifeline. It's their hope for a better future. They've endured so much, all because they believed a degree from Cyprus would open doors for them. Going back empty-handed, it would feel like they failed, like all that sacrifice was for nothing.
So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Staying in Cyprus means more hardship and uncertainty, but going back to Nigeria without those transcripts could derail their entire future.
It's a terrible situation, and it points to a bigger problem, the vulnerability of international students, really. They leave their home countries with these dreams of a better education, but they're often met with unforeseen challenges, risks that no one really talks about.
That's a really good point. We often hear about the benefits of studying abroad, the exciting opportunities, but we don't always consider the potential downsides and the lack of support that some students experience.
Exactly. And this case really highlights that. It's not enough to just provide scholarships. There needs to be a system in place to ensure that these students have access to essential resources, support networks, legal protections while they're studying abroad.
So taking all of this into account, what can be done to help these students? Are there any solutions, any avenues for support that could make a difference?
Well, first and foremost, there needs to be greater transparency and accountability from the Zamfara state government. They need to be clear with these students about their intentions. Will they actually pay those outstanding scholarships? Or will they help facilitate a safe and orderly return, making sure these students get their transcripts and the support they need to continue their education elsewhere?
Absolutely. These students need concrete actions, clear answers, not just more promises and confusion.
Right. And beyond that, I think advocacy groups and international organizations have a crucial role to play here. They can amplify the students' voices, raise awareness about what's happening, and put pressure on the authorities to take responsibility.
And maybe even connect them with resources, maybe legal aid, counseling, things like that, to help them navigate this difficult situation.
Exactly, providing them with practical support, empowering them to advocate for their own rights.
And on a broader level, this case really underscores the need for, a global reevaluation of how we support international students. We need stronger policies, better oversight of these scholarship programs, and a much greater awareness of the unique challenges they often face.
I couldn't agree more. Education is a fundamental human right.
Yeah.
Access to it shouldn't be determined by where you're from, your financial resources, or political circumstances.
Well said. So let's shift gears a little bit and put ourselves in their shoes. Imagine you're one of these students facing these incredibly difficult choices. What would you do?
Wow, that's a tough one. It's so easy to offer advice from the outside, but the reality is these students are dealing with incredibly complex decisions. Their options are limited, and the consequences are very real.
It's really a no-win situation for them, isn't it?
It is. And it makes you wonder about the responsibility of the institutions involved, too. What about the Cyprus International University, where they're supposed to be studying? What are they doing to support these students during this whole ordeal? Are they advocating for them with the Zamfara state government?
Those are good points. We often focus on the government's role, but the university also has a responsibility to look after its students, especially in a situation as dire as this one.
Absolutely. And this whole situation also brings up some bigger questions about the Nigerian education system itself. I mean, why are so many students seeking opportunities abroad in the first place?
Yeah, is it because there aren't enough quality options within Nigeria? Or is something else going on?
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe if there were more investment in Nigeria's own education system, this whole situation could have been avoided.
That's a thought-provoking point. Strengthening their own educational infrastructure could potentially reduce this reliance on foreign scholarships and give more Nigerian students the chance to pursue their dreams right at home. But let's circle back to something we touched on earlier, the political situation in northern Cyprus. You mentioned it's a self-declared republic, recognized only by Turkey.
Right, and that adds another layer of complexity to this whole situation. The fact that it's not internationally recognized creates a lot of uncertainty for these students.
So on top of everything else, their situation is made even more precarious by this geopolitical ambiguity.
Exactly. It raises all sorts of questions about their legal standing, their rights as students. I mean, do they have access to the same protections and support as students in, say, a fully recognized country? If something goes wrong, who can they turn to for help? It's unclear.
It's a real tangled web, isn't it? These individual students caught in the middle of political complexities, bureaucratic failures, and systemic challenges.
It is. And it highlights how interconnected everything is. We can't fully understand this situation without considering the historical and political context, the challenges within Nigeria's education system, the whole issue of international student mobility. It's all intertwined.
Okay, so we've delved into a lot today. The financial struggles, the impact on education, the emotional strain, the evacuation dilemma, the roles of the government and the university, even the geopolitical complexities of northern Cyprus. It's a complex issue, to say the least, and it's clear there are no easy answers.
You're right, there's no quick fix. But I think one of the biggest takeaways for our listeners is simply awareness. By understanding the complexities, sharing these students' stories, engaging in informed discussions, we can start to create a more supportive and equitable environment for international students everywhere.
And I think it's a call to action, too. What can our listeners do to actually help these students and others who might be in similar situations?
There are a lot of options. You can research organizations that support international students, donate to their causes, reach out to your elected officials, advocate for better policies and support systems, even just sharing this story with friends and family, raising awareness about the issue. Every little bit helps.
Absolutely, because ultimately, this isn't just about 90 students in Northern Cyprus, is it? It's about the fundamental right to education, making sure that every student, no matter where they're from or what challenges they face, has a chance to succeed.
I couldn't agree more. And, it's important to remember that these students are incredibly resilient. They haven't given up. They're still fighting for their education, for their future. Their determination is truly inspiring. It should encourage all of us to keep working towards a world where every student has the opportunity to thrive.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a difficult story to unpack, but we hope it's inspired you to think critically about the challenges facing international students around the world and to consider how we can all contribute to creating a more just and equitable education system for everyone.